think that all human beings, and Jews are included, throughout their lives, ask themselves questions about their own identity, about their place in the world. As it happens in Judaism, there's a specific time of the year where you do that more intensely. The liturgy is about that. The holidays are about that. And that, of course, is the period right at the end of the summer. The Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, where you go through an intense process of thinking about the year that's gone by, evaluating what you did, what your behavior was. It's a period, in fact, when you are supposed to go to people that you, in some way, if you've wronged them or you've hurt their feelings, and ask them, in a way, to try to make amends.
I remember as a child in a very traditional, old-fashioned synagogue, standing next to my father and being surrounded by a lot of elderly men. The women were upstairs in the balcony, many with long beards, tallis over their heads, and thinking to myself in a very childlike kind of way, who will live and who will die? Which of these old men are not going to be here next Rosh Hashanah? That's why, to me, the day, the whole notion of the day as marking endings and beginnings is very powerful. This sense of pausing, a kind of an island in time, with a year behind and a year about to begin, is something which every human being needs. When we think about the words, mi yachye u mi yamut, who will live and who will die, I think those words of the Rosh Hashanah prayer are precisely the reason why they carry such power, is that they speak to that vulnerability.
Each of the Jewish festivals, the way in which Jews celebrates the year, they of course have many meanings. Most of the festivals are related both to some historical event that is commemorated, either the Exodus from Egypt or something along those lines, as well as being a kind of memory of the climate in the land of Israel, because they all commemorate the agricultural cycle of Israel, and that's something which is part of our memory as a people, in a way. The two of the most important festivals in the Jewish year, actually, though, do not have any specific Jewish historical meaning, and that's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the Jewish New Year and the Day of Atonement. In a way, maybe they're more universal. Rosh Hashanah is also called the birthday of the world, and they're moments that cause us to think about the year that has passed. They're more internal in a way. We're involved in a more kind of ethical searching, ethical questions, at the same time that they are in some ways more personal and in some ways more universal.
Jewish time is what I would call liturgical time. It is felt time. It is experiential time. It's not mathematics, and it has nothing to do with the sun and the moon and the calendar. It has a lot to do with feelings, with the tone that is in the air. It has a lot to do with sounds and smells and tastes. It's experiential time, which is why the year, as it is lived by the Jew, and this is nothing conceptual or cerebral, this is really a matter of a living experience, has a rhythm to it. Our lives are filled with passages, with transitions, and we mark the transitions from night to day and day to night in prayer. And each has a very distinctive tone and mood to it, which is conveyed by the liturgy and by the rituals. And we mark the transition from the week to the Sabbath and the Sabbath to the week with rituals of Kiddush and Havdalah. We go from month to month and we celebrate the end of a month and the beginning of a new month with Rosh Chodesh. Sukkot is nature. It's the end of the natural cycle. It's the fall harvest. Simchat Torah is a day of endings and beginnings. We end the cycle of the Torah reading for the year, and we begin it again with Genesis, with the creation story.
Jews still say at the end of the Passover service, Shana Ba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. It's part of an identity, whether it's the physical Jerusalem that's there now, or whether it's some idea of Jerusalem. It's still a very powerful thread linking the Jews today to their past, and I think into the future.
They're all transitional festivals. Rosh Hashanah, the transition is the renewal of creation, the end of a year, the beginning of a year.
You should be healthy, you should have luck in everything what you're doing. You know, my grandchildren, all family.
Every male among you throughout your generations shall be circumcised when he is 8 days old.
Grow up to the Lord, to marriage, and to good deeds.
Sad, Mazel Tov, Kol Sad, Mazel Tov, alle Machatunem Mazel Tov, in a Mazel Tov, Chusel Sad, Mazel Tov, Kol Sad, Mazel Tov, Kol Yisruel Mazel Tov, in a Mazel Tov.
whole notion of interpretation, of finding explanations, of creating meaning, of promoting understanding, which is so important in Judaism, relates to this whole idea of midrash, which is a kind of a story or an explanation, or there's so many things in the Bible which are hard to understand. There's so little information. So this tradition grew up in Judaism of telling stories. It's kind of the stories in between the lines, of being able to understand what's the gap between here and there. Something doesn't make sense. So these stories and interpretations evolve.
Midrash is a process. It is an activity. It's a doing. It's the doing of finding within a closed text a new level or a new nuance of meaning. It's exegesis, it's interpretation. It's constantly going back to a word or a verse or a letter or a chapter or a narrative in some canonical text and finding there a truth which until this moment has been unsuspected. It's a twist, a key, a new way of understanding what has been said and taught. I think all of Jewish history, beginning with the earliest formulation of what we might call biblical religion, understood that it was inevitable that we would assimilate into Judaism all kinds of ideas and institutions that existed throughout the ancient Near East. And that was just the beginning. I think in every generation, in every culture, Jews have lived in a big wide world, in a lot of different big wide worlds, and have known how to nurse from the outside cultures, how to bring into Judaism new visions, new institutions, new ideas, new styles, and Judaize them through Midrash.
There's a very beautiful Midrash that I sometimes quote. It's the Midrash about the Bnei Israel when they came to cross the Red Sea. And it is said that at the time of crossing the Red Sea, each tribe went along his own path, and each tribe were separated by a wall of water. And each tribe could see one another through those 12 walls of water. And there's nothing more beautiful for me to illustrate what the Klal Israel is all about. It's only by respecting our specific identity that we will be able to reach unity.
To be a Jew is not easy. It's not in vogue. It's much more fashionable to be a Buddhist. So you don't get too many votes for being Jewish. And for many years I tried very hard to run away from being Jewish. And I did. I went as far as I could. I went to New York and tried to assimilate and forget that I was Jewish and forget that I was from Israel and to forget Hebrew. And it didn't work.
I was born 1910, 4 years before the World War, in a shtetl in Galician. Podvolochiska was the name. Our emperor was the emperor of Austria-Hungary, Franz Joseph, but the Jews called him Freum Jossel, not Franz Joseph. Our Kaiser, Freum Jossel. He was regarded as a good Kaiser. But when I was 4 years from this good Kaiser, my father, he built for me, he made for me a horse, a wooden horse. This is one of my first memories. I sat down on this horse and my father taught me a song. Hop susi, harem raglayim, sal Yerushalayim. Horse, horse, raise your legs and go to Jerusalem. I did not know Podvolochiska and not Lemberg. I knew Jerusalem from the beginning.
one of my own very strong childhood memories harks back to early mornings, like 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, when my father got up and after his prayer would start to work with silver and gold. He was a silversmith. And then as he works and as he hammers, he sings the Bible. He sang like the Haftorahs, or he sang like the Psalms of David, and he had no books. He was just working, but he was singing the whole morning. He would do that.
When I was growing up, I don't think I planned on being a rabbi. I think I felt that I would be anything but a rabbi. And when I was at university and I was living in a Jewish communal house and found myself leading services and teaching classes, I realized that the rabbinic role was something that suited me. It was something I liked doing and something I liked doing well. And just because it would give my parents nachas, that wasn't enough of a reason not to do it.
When I first came and I met American Jews who, you know, would have to pull down their kites. They were flying kites in the park because the first star came out on Friday, and that meant that it was the beginning of Shabbos and they were going to go to synagogue, that I thought that they were frauds because I thought a Jew had to speak Yiddish, be an atheist, and be a socialist, and that was a true, authentic Jew.
The importance of being Jewish is knowing where you stand in the world and knowing what it means to be Jewish. And I really don't think that whether you're Reform or Orthodox or Conservative, I think that that's just the details. I don't think that's not as important as knowing the laws and studying the Torah.
Every writer, in a way, is a Jew. Even if he's a Chinese or Japanese or Indian, there is something so Jewish in the belief that the world is something that you have to decode, to decipher, to understand it, and there to create your system of rules and regulations in order to survive in that. There is something very Jewish in rewriting the memory, the past, and give it new significance.
Maybe there is really a covenant. I mean, in my rational mind, I cannot accept it. But in my right brain or non-rational mind, it makes a lot of sense. In my left brain, it doesn't make sense at all. My left brain wants to defy it totally.
In the famous prayer, the Amidah, we say, our God and God of our ancestors. It doesn't talk about necessarily, we pray for what will be the future commitment, but there are no guarantees that the covenant is going to continue in future generations. That is something that every generation takes on itself, to renew the covenant between God and the Jewish people, or between the Jewish people and the Jewish tradition, however you want to define it.
There is a covenant between us and the divine supreme power. And I think we may not reflect upon a daily consciousness of this, but it is in our subconscious existence. And it continues to be very important.
We told in the story of creation that God separated the waters above from the waters below, and then it's all confounded because people did evil things. So they broke the rules, he broke the rules. So it's a mess. After the flood, there's a covenant, and that's the first time that the word covenant appears in the Bible. It doesn't appear before. And the covenant means that God separates the waters again, and then the sign of the covenant, of course, is the rainbow, and it's going to be there permanently. In other words, there'll be some predictable elements in life, and human beings will be able to plan their lives a little bit. There'll be some order in the madness. Those poor earthlings will not be smashed completely. They will have some autonomy. Everything that follows is based on that, on the idea that you know that you are in the palm of a God that can smash you anytime. Sometimes he does. Holocaust. But you know that you enjoy some autonomy and that this is what you work with. You're never secure about it. This is what you do. This is what you live with. And it's a lot. When you think of it, it's a lot. It's not a little, it's a lot.
If it wasn't for God and how he rescued us from Egypt, then we wouldn't be alive today. There would be no Jews. And so we have to keep that in mind every single day when we pray, that God took us out of Egypt. And if God didn't do that, we wouldn't be here.
Everything started here in Rome, when Jerusalem was destroyed. When Jerusalem was destroyed by Titus, we were brought here in Rome as slaves. And as unbelievable as it is, we have crossed 2,000 years of history, and we are still here, alive, in the heart of Edom, in the heart of Christianity. This empire which has tried to assimilate us, to seduce us, to destroy us, we have lived here and we have survived. We are incredible animals who can adapt themselves to any situation. A Jew is not one thing. That's why we are 12 tribes. And that's why we were spread among the nation. We are not only a memory about ourselves, but we are the memory of the nations.
We fled Italy during fascism to escape persecutions. My father took us to safety in America, where we, after the fascists enforced the racial laws, and we were able to study, to work, and it was an extremely important experience for us, the 4,000 Italian Jews who found refuge in America. And what happened at the end of the war? Of course, the birth of the State of Israel was an exciting, unique experience for all of us. It gave us a sense of security. But on the other hand, when I had dreams at night in America, and I had nostalgic dreams, I dreamt of the smell of the sea in some little harbor of Italy. I even dreamt of Baroque churches, because in my subconscious, the place where I came from was Italy.
We Jewish people, for more than 2,000 years, we live in an exile. We didn't have all those concrete elements of sovereignty. We didn't have a flag, not a land, concrete physical land of our own. We didn't have army to protect ourselves. We didn't have this notion of self-confidence. And I think we created for ourselves a kind of a verbal environment to compensate ourselves for that. So we had the language, the words, as our place, as our concrete place.
Pour moi, le passage à l'exil, c'est un passage de quelque chose de symbole dans la réalité. C'est-à-dire c'est devenu une pratique, une méthode, une mode de vie vraiment.
The traditional notion is, you know, Palestine, Israel's home, any place else is exile, gullus. You're not a full Jew until you go back there. You're never going to be at home anywhere else. And, I mean, you know, I believe in sort of real kind of concrete things. I don't feel in Israel any more at home. I mean, maybe I should. Maybe history tells me that I should, but I don't think I feel any more at home there than I do anywhere. And I don't know that, that the people that live there are more Jews, more Jewish or more whatever than I am here. I just don't believe that as a reality.
When Agnon got the Nobel Prize, he was asked in Stockholm, from where you come, Mr. Agnon? And he answered in his way, he spoke slowly, I am from Jerusalem, but because Titus destroyed the temple, I was born in Poland.
Israel was an imaginary place, an abstract place, a focus for longings, to aspire to. It was the place where, when you wanted to elate yourself on Shabbat, on holidays, that you were talking about Israel, about Zion, about Jerusalem. And I must tell you, it has also some destructive aspects, because it turned to be an abstract place. And we see until today how few people, Jewish people, are coming to Israel, because you can have your Jerusalem in your heart. You don't have to come here to this troubled city and to this miserable country with all the troubles and all the tensions and conflicts. You can be a very good Zionist, so people might think, in Brooklyn or wherever, in London or in France. And, well, I don't belong to that. I think I want to live in my story. Nations and peoples are created by symbols and by common stories and common memories. But in front of the complexity of the modern world, in front of the challenges of modernity, of the threats of assimilating in another cultures, another society, symbols are not enough. You need something much more concrete and much more rewarding. And life here is very rewarding, I think. It's very difficult to live here. And you know, you came here to interview me, and I'm in the middle of a reserve service. I have to give, each year I have to give 44 days in Miluim. And I served 4 years in the army. And once I calculated, it's 8 years that I'll have to give to the army, to the extreme arbitrariness. I will not write, let's say, 2 or 3 novels because of these 8 years. But yet, I don't want to live in another place. I don't want my children to live in another place. I think that in our modern and very shaky world, for a Jew to live here in the place where every stone is so significant, where he is taking part in building a society which was such a dream 50 years ago only. This is such a rare privilege. I wouldn't miss it for the world, and I mean for the world.
Israel is a home in a different sense. It's nothing that I can pinpoint logically. It's not logical, because my mind did not want to come here and could not find any good reason to come here, but my heart did. And I was pulled like a magnet by the light here, by the energy, by the physicality of this place. There's a certain power here, there's a certain magnetism, there's a certain light, and in that sense I feel very much at home here. I feel safe. I feel like I'm in a womb, that I have come home. It's not a home one would usually think about with 4 walls and parents, but it's, if you will, a spiritual home.
Many of the leaders, the Zionist leaders, I don't think understood Judaism very well. And I don't think they understood the Jews of Yemen. Therefore, one of the great tragedies in Israel, in fact, was the exposure of such very significant Jewish communities to what was believed to be superior culture, a Western culture. And therefore, taking this community and particularly the children and the young people, and impressing upon them that modern social and scientific ideas were more meaningful than the knowledge of their tradition and their culture.
Growing up in Israel, I was considered an Oriental, a Bukharian, which was not in vogue either. In fact, everybody hated Bukharians because they looked strange, they had different customs, they were considered primitive, backwards. It was not an Ashkenazi culture which was in the ascendance in Israel at the time. And I had all the complexes you can possibly imagine.
Il y avait toute une discrimination énorme de tout cet énorme passé, parce que quand on voit l'exil qu'en fonction de la retour en Sion, ça veut dire qu'on ignore ou on annule toute l'histoire juive comme un trou noir, comme quelque chose qui n'a pas de signification, qui n'a pas de sens en soi. Et ça, c'est quelque chose immoral, pas juste et complètement faux.
I reject any conception, any view of the diaspora as being a place where some Israelis in exile or where some temporary exiles live who are bound who are bound to go back sooner or later to Israel. I believe that the diaspora is there to stay. And it should be. It's good for the Jews to have a diaspora. Because look, if we survived along the centuries, it's not despite the diaspora, but because of the dispersion of the Jews.
Because if we didn't have the commandment or the laws, then everything would be hectic, like everyone would be killing everyone or hurting everyone, not listening to each other, doing what they wanted, you know, and like not having any progress in anything.
The central building block for the Jew is the Jewish family. With the destruction of the temple, there is a striking statement in the tradition that says when the temple was destroyed and we were not able to offer up sacrifices on the altar, the temple's altar is replaced by the family dining table. And that we can't offer up holiday sacrifices. Instead, you have family meals around every holiday. And that the meal around each holiday replaces the temple. It's a striking sentiment. This wonderful thing that we remember, the temple is replaced by the family. The sacred altar is replaced by the simple table that we share our holiday meals and our daily meals around. And that really has infused Jewish life throughout the diaspora.
I see feminist seders, I see lesbian seders that I've attended. They're nothing like anything I came from. They don't use Yiddish, they don't use traditional texts, they don't use Yiddish texts. You know, women, I mean, I have endless feminist Haggadahs that have all kinds of, you know, texts from women and biblical and historical and mythical, contemporary events. They're very, very different. And they feel to me, sometimes they feel there's a part of them that feels alien, but there's a part of them that feels very comfortable and familiar to me. I'm not someone who belongs only to one community, which I think is also different.
I think that the entire Talmudic tradition is basically that. It's a kind of it's a kind of poetry which is done based on poetry which is already there, and the source is God. But it's and you do it with laws. It's very strange, I guess, for a lot of people to think of laws as poetry, but it is. It's the song of your life. It's not a song that you sing with music. But it's a different kind of music.
This is what has been done for a lot of generations, and it's become customs that that Jewish people have followed these laws, and some more than others. But I think they're still very special, and I don't want to break that chain.
I think modern people will not be able to submit themselves to an authoritarian way of life that dictates everything that they do. And yet Jews are constantly in a search for community. And I think this is the essence of the modern Jewish spiritual path. Me as an individual, reaching out to a community and living in that tension. I always think of the two most common names for God that we have, Adonai and Eloheinu. Adonai is in the singular, my Lord. Eloheinu is in the plural, our God. And it's not by accident that those two phrases always come together in blessings and in the prayer, the Shema. It's always Adonai and Eloheinu. Judaism is not a single solitary path, and it is not a totally communal path. It's a community made up of individuals. It's individuals in search of a community. There is always the idea of the minyan, of 9 Jews who are looking for the 10th, of 1 Jew who's looking for the other 9.
Judaism is in fact, has proven to be very pliant, and changeable, and it's not static. I think it's people don't realize that Hasidim weren't around 400 years ago, as early as 400 or 300 years ago. That people don't realize it. They think that's it. This is orthodoxy. This is the traditional Jew, and it's been here forever. It's not true. And they don't even realize that Hasidim were excommunicated when they first arrived on the scene. So I think that kind of flexibility is the kind that we have to keep in mind. And the fact is that just like Hasidism became something totally new that had not existed before, I suspect in 100 years, there will be forms of Judaism that we do not recognize right now or even see. And it will be very changed. It'll have a common thread of historical connections. It will undoubtedly have biblical resonances, but it will not be anything that we see right now. And I think we have to be open to that.
I remember, it's an anecdote, when my elder son was born, and after a very exhausting day, in the hospital, I drove back from Har HaTzofim, from Mount Corpus, back to my home in Talpiot, and then after a curve in the road, suddenly I saw Jerusalem, with all the beauty of Jerusalem by night, with all the lights and the special atmosphere about Jerusalem. And I stopped the car by the road, and I waited, and I told to myself, listen, now, don't be ashamed. It's been a good day. You have a son, a wonderful son, and your wife is okay, she's healthy, and it's good. Say, thank you, God. And I just couldn't say it. I felt that if I thank him at that moment, it really means that deep in my heart, I do believe that there is such a power, or such an entity. And I didn't, and I'm asking myself, what is the part of having God or not having God in my Jewishness? And nevertheless, I think I'm very much of a Jew, without any God in my life. There are many ways and streets in Judaism, and one of them is my way, and it has no God sign on it, but yet it is Jewish.
We should pass down the stories so our great-great-grandchildren would know that about what happened 2,000 years ago. What use would it be to be a Jew if you don't even know what happened back then? What use is it?
Endings and beginnings will continue in a moment.
Given the task of creating an exhibition that would cover these thousands of years of Jewish life and culture, of Jewish history. I mean, first it was overwhelming and a little scary, obviously, but also very exciting. It was a great challenge. I think in the end, we really looked at a couple of very basic questions about Jewish culture. One of them was really, how is it that Jews have survived over all of these centuries? What made that possible? And not just survived, but really thrived and created a vibrant culture which kept changing, kept evolving. and also what really constituted identity for a group of people who were so incredibly diverse because they lived in so many different parts of the world, and also, as I mentioned, this fact that the culture has changed and developed over time. So this diversity and yet this sense of incredible unity. What constituted identity for the Jewish people? The show is really about the relationship or the dialectic between this incredible continuity of Jewish history, 4,000 years or 5,000 years, and the dialectic between that continuity and the incredible change and evolution that has taken place. And in many ways, it is precisely the ability to adapt and change to some degree, which accounted for the survival. So, of course, all these questions are related.
I think it's extremely important to know one's own past and the past of one's ethnic group or racial group or whatever it is, really, in order to know who one is, first of all, in order to know what it means to call oneself a Jew or an African American. It's also, I think, important for another reason. In order to feel that one's life has a sense of meaning, you have to know how come your life is the way it is, you know? You have to know something about the causal antecedents of where you stand now. Because then you can say, well, the reason I see things this way, the reason I react this way, is because of what I've been through, what I've been taught, what my parents have been through, what my community has been through. And if you can't say that, then it's very hard to generate a sense of objective importance and value of one's own perceptions. So I think, you know, history is important in order to give meaning to one's life.
So the story of my family begins not only with my own parents and with my maternal and paternal grandparents in America, but it goes back to Romania and to Russia, and before that to Spain, and before that to Palestine, and it goes all the way back to the Exodus from Egypt, and it goes back to Abraham, and all of that is my story. And so at various points in the year, and indeed various points of the day also in our liturgy, I have to establish my identity. And how do I establish my identity? Not by telling God what I believe, but by reminding God who I am.
Judaism survived and thrived as it did all over the world over the centuries because Jews had evolved, had developed this portable culture. It's something that happened already in the ancient period. Many of those institutions which constitute this portable culture were developing and evolving at the time when the temple still existed. But the point is that by the time the temple was destroyed, this culture was in place. It was a text-based culture. It was a culture of law. It no longer required a temple because you had much more localized places, synagogues, gathering places, prayer halls. Synagogue is a house of study and a place of assembly and a house of worship. It's all those things wrapped into one. You no longer had kings. That was already a much earlier development. But you also no longer had priests. You had rabbis instead. You had teachers. Those were the people who led the community. And it meant that Jews could really go all over the world, as they did throughout the Mediterranean, North Africa, even further east into India and parts of Asia, all over Europe, and of course eventually to the United States, to the Americas, and it eventually became the United States, both North and South America. And develop with this basis, of course, local developments, local customs, if you will, but the core of the culture remained the same and was something that really could be taken anywhere.
The fact of the ongoing process of Midrash and the fact that Jews constantly assimilated into Judaism notions that came from different outside worlds suggests that Judaism was a very different matter from generation to generation, from culture to culture. There was always development and change and self-transformation. There was also very clearly some powerful sources of continuity, of identity, which made all of these changes part of the distinct, highly individualistic Jewish experience. What made it all Jewish? First of all, there was, I think, a very powerful sense of peoplehood, of community, of belonging to an extended family with a shared history and a shared destiny. Two, I think there were historical memories. The Exodus from Egypt, Sinai, a moment in which the community as a whole understood what its unique and distinctive message to the world would be. Dreams of a future. Messianism, the sense that the world could be perfected, would ultimately be perfected, and that they would be instruments in the process of perfecting the world, of repairing the world. Halacha, the notion that ultimately our most basic commitments have to be articulated in behavior, in very, very strictly defined, predictable ways of dealing with complex life situations, with rituals that dotted the day, week, year of life experience of the Jew, with a very powerful emphasis on how to structure interpersonal relations. It's almost as if they said that interpersonal relations are complicated. It's very difficult, very complicated to know how to deal with other people. We need structure, we need predictability. That's what Jewish law provides. That's what halakha provides. These are, I think, some of the sources of identity, which, with all the transformations and all of the changes, nevertheless, there were certain structures and certain memories and certain visions, which, and particularly this sense of mishpacha, this sense of community, the sense of an intertwined destiny. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. All Jews are one company, one integrated family. We're all bound with each other. We are responsible for the entire community.
Many of the objects that were created to help celebrate events in the life cycle of Jews actually depict some of those moments. For example, we have a wonderful coffee service that was a gift to a bride and groom, and the plate actually shows a marriage scene. What you see there is a bride and groom, not actually under a marriage canopy in this case, but with a single prayer shawl over their heads, so that if they're wrapped in the same prayer shawl, it signifies their union. One of the things that's important also about most of these events is that they take place in front of other people. In that case, you have the two witnesses. But many of them, in fact, take place in front of or in the company of a minyan, which is a quorum of 10, who in a way are standing in for the entire community. When you go through these important events in your life, you do them obviously as an individual, but you also do them as a part of the community, whether it's the birth of a child and the naming of a child that takes place afterwards, or the circumcision of a male child, marriage, and also burial is something which is really, in a way, a communal activity, so that Jews throughout their lives are reaffirming that link that they have to the community, to the collective, at the same time that they're celebrating as individuals.
I think, you know, the Jewish religion and the Jewish faith and the lifestyle has been driven, I believe, by forces that are internal to that tradition. You know, a set of values that's been handed down from generation to generation, a set of practices, a way of looking at the world, which has been driven not by the desire to alienate anyone or to bring suspicion upon their own heads, but simply to express their value system and live in the way that they wish to live. And surprisingly and shockingly to me, that attempt simply to be who they are is met with continual hatred and misunderstanding and guilt and suspicion over and over and over.
This word is, as far as I could figure out, the most charged word in our language. In the sense, in the simple, almost simple-minded sense of negative and positive connections. And I have written that where one ear hears the single syllable which can conjure forth the beginning of our culture, another ear hears an accusation wider and deeper than any in language. Well, one of my favorite writers is a Chinese writer named Chuang Tzu. And if I could take him at his word, he would have argued against doing this painting, because he wrote, "Don't try to change the world. You'll only make matters worse." And 22 centuries later, and that would be the 20s of our own century, a man named Israel Zangwill, conscious or otherwise of this remark of Chuang Tzu, said, "Take from me the hope that I can change the future, and you will send me mad." And that gives you both sides of the argument as to whether to make a painting of the word Jew.
I understand xenophobia to be, in a way, a case of the desire for harmony and oneness with other people that has gone awry, you know? From wanting to share everything with another person, to share everything with another community or with a culture, you know, and then thinking that anyone who marks difference in any way all of a sudden is a serious threat to that, is, you know, that's a very typical, very deep-seated, I think, probably deeply ingrained xenophobic human response.
In the last gallery, we present contemporary art that comments on all kinds of issues of Jewish identity and Jewish history by Jews and by non-Jews. And I found the Adrienne Piper piece very, very powerful. And she made it in connection with a project expressing issues around the Rosenberg case. And she chose to interpret that in terms of broader issues of fear of the other, xenophobia and anti-Semitism.
I incorporated the broken glass, actually, for a couple of reasons. One was that I wanted people to see, when they looked at these images of the Rosenbergs, I wanted them to see themselves. I wanted them to see part of themselves. I wanted to heighten the sense that I think one has just from knowing what the Rosenbergs look like visually, that these people could be me. These people could be members of my family. They could be one of us. And yet they're not, because they're surrounded by government officials who signal that they're objects of suspicion. The other reason for using the broken glass is because I wanted to explore a little bit what happens when we break through a kind of solipsism. You know, we construct the world in a certain way, and we see ourselves reflected in the world we construct. And then all of a sudden something happens, and our world shatters. And when our world shatters, our sense of wholeness as individuals also shatters. And then it becomes very interesting to look within and look beyond that surface appearance of ourselves and to see what's there.
I was struck by the Anastasi painting when I first saw it. I recalled an interpretation of the revelation at Sinai, which was written by a Hasidic a mystic rabbi. Rabbi Mendel of Rimanov says that all that God revealed at Sinai was the Aleph, which is the first letter of the first word of the Ten Commandments. The Aleph of the Hebrew word Anochi. And what is stunning about that interpretation of Sinai is that the Aleph is soundless. It becomes an ah if you add a patach underneath it of a vowel or an ah or an eh, but if you take the Aleph by itself, it is simply. So what Rabbi Mendel was saying was that God revealed no specific contentful Torah. God revealed a framework.
So this is all about it. This is all about that big question. What is beauty? What is religious? What is spiritual? Every artist is involved in that. And it's a search. And I think every human is involved with it. I think the idea that art is separate is as fallacious as the idea that God is separate, perhaps. You know, maybe the real wisdom is that God is in everything. How could it be otherwise?
The preceding program was a production of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America.